So welcome back again. We have just a quick and very fascinating discussion with author, pastor, and teacher Eric Jon Phelps. And of course, the beginning of the recording, I messaged him that I was getting ready and we were 30 minutes out, and I would call him. And at the 30 minutes point, if you know anything about Eric Jon Phelps, he doesn't like to be late or delayed, so he called me. And of course, I was still in the process of trying to make sure all my audio devices were going to work properly. I don't have a studio. I just have a series of different devices. I try to see which ones work the best together at any given time, which ones sound the best and don't have any feedback. So in the beginning of our conversation, the audio is a little bit muffled and jumbled there, and I apologize for that. But if you just give it a chance and you just work with us here as we were engineering the ship mid-flight, we were able to get a good sound where he was able to hear me and we weren't having any feedback. So once again, I just want to appreciate you for coming back again, and I hope you will come and check out our new sponsor, a courageous and brave sponsor, much like our other sponsor. Now we have two, right? Wendy'sLimited.com, very brave. But there's another sponsor as well, and it's ColossusHobbies.com. So it's Colossus Hobbies, Games, and Gifts. And I think if you take a look, Colossus Hobbies, toys, games, gifts, and sports, and looks like camping equipment, all kinds of stuff. And they're a growing company, and they're up and coming, and they're an America First, pro-American, pro-patriot company, and I hope you will check them out. And I think they're going to be including only things in there that are healthy for America and American recreation and American pastime and American leisure time, if you want. So once again, that's ColossusHobbies.com. So yeah, Eric Jon Phelps is a busy man, and he has a very fascinating point of view. And I'd like to go over, just having caught his discussions early on and having learned a lot of the perspective and the early American viewpoint that is lost in today's modern contemporary period. People don't understand the dynamics of history, right? There's my devices working there in the background. But yeah, a lot of these dynamics that led up to America's revolutionary and literally inspired genesis and the beginning point, the origin story of American liberty and freedom and jurisprudence has really got to go and be placed in the historical struggle for people to have their King James Version Bible in particular, and to have a land that would be conducive to having political liberty and democratic popular government so that people could choose to have religious tolerance and freedom. They could have their own edict of Nantes for themselves rather than relying on some king somewhere to have a heart, right? So we're not going to wait for the World Economic Forum or for the power structures to have a heart. We're going to go and do what's best for us now. And as we're going forward, we don't really get paid for it, but we'll just do a little extra sponsorship for the turmeric iodine that comes out of the InfoWars stores. And we have to admit that it's truly it's something that I hadn't really even heard of or put any thought to, but that the effects of it, as far as the health effects and the high quality content that comes with the atomic iodine, is something that's spectacular. So it's something that we're using. We find to be medicinal and healthy for us to do so, and it's good for cleaning out your liver and your thyroid and all kinds of other things. So it just gets deep into those systems. It helps to clean out parts of your body that are otherwise not able to be cleaned out, right? So they get high marks for that over there at InfoWars store. So give them credit for that. And I hope that we are able to do more interviews with Eric Jon Phelps in the future. And we were in the process of having a gentleman's debt over the literature and the compilation of the history regarding the fact that Martin Luther, the figure of Martin Luther, who was central in kicking off the Protestant Reformation, was never an anti-Semite, or never did he dislike Jews any kind of way, nor did he write the falsified and forgery on the Jews and their lives. Of course, it was written in his name after he died, and it was obviously a forgery. It doesn't comport with any of his own beliefs or writings or doctrinal positions on theology, but it tries to make Martin Luther appear to be some kind of anti-Semitic hater of the Jews, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And of course, it was a piece of propaganda that was utilized by the Third Reich and by Goebbels and them to try to take and influence the Lutherans at the time, the Lutheran Church, and to convince them that even Martin Luther had a problem with those perfidious Jews, as they like to say. But of course, that anti-Semitism and that particular rubric was, of course, a forgery, as we've said many times, and that Martin Luther never wrote such a horrible book. And the only people really capable of producing such a well-crafted and hateful ideological weapon poised and aimed at the heart of the Jewish people on a historical scale, right? The only people capable of actually executing such a forgery, as we said, would be, of course, the Jesuits and the Society of Jesus, because they have such a track record and a historical legacy of being contemptuous and violently opposed to the Jewish race. So when we go to look and see where the roots of anti-Semitism are coming from, we can look over to the Vatican and see that. So without further ado, I won't keep on prattling on anymore. We can listen to the discussion with Eric Jon Phelps. And of course, because of my negligence on my part, the beginning audio for a few minutes is a little bit garbly, and that is my fault. So once again, thank you for returning to the discussion forum, and I hope that you find this conversation to be enlightening. All right, that's good. I'm glad you're getting around and you're at least able to. It looks like my equipment is up and running here, so I was just about to call you when you called.
Okay, and, very good.
Yeah, welcome back to. You've been on our little show before on Looking Glass Forum, and we've had opportunities to speak many times. And it's just there's so much going on in America right now, and it was a good time to get with you and to have a chance to talk about your perspective on how you see things kind of unfolding here in America, and yeah, what are you, from your point of view? There's so much going on. I prepared a little bit, but not too much, because I just wanted to see what your point of view would be. But it's an election year. They definitely have been trying to, or from ostensibly from our point of view, it appears that the DOJ is desperately trying to put the man away and get him in trouble where he can't be at the president. And of course, it's just kind of creating a populist backlash and a resurgence in his favor. So, among many other things, what's your point of view with the landscape of American politics today?
Well, first of all, Sean, it's nice to be on your program again. Thank you for having me. Secondly, as I've said for years, the Jesuit order runs. Anybody who denies that doesn't know what they're talking about. They run it through their secret societies, the Masonic secret societies, some 800 of them. But the brains, power, the ones who have conquered the world are the Jesuits, by Jesuits, or army, which is the military order of the Society of Jesus. That's who rules. What's the purpose of the Jesuit order? Well, it was founded to fight and down the Reformation, according to Thomas Sherman, who was the son of that savage Yankee general, William Thompson. And Thomas Sherman was a Jesuit, and he said the purpose of the order, and we can know from other documents, is that they wanted to destroy the Reformation. Now, in destroying the Reformation, we have to talk about race. I know it's difficult to talk about race, especially if you're a white man, but I do, and I do it all the time. The men that the Lord used to bring the world out of the dark age white, they spoke English, Dutch, and German. And the Lord used to put His word into those languages to then take the gospel to the ends of the earth. The Lord has chosen to save His elect by preaching translation is preserved. Except Greek text is even measured. Most advanced languages, other than Greek, which is the most definitive language ever written, God chose to put the record of his Son in, are the languages of English and German and Dutch. So those nations, particularly England, and then the Netherlands, and then Germany or Prussia, and then ultimately America, became the most powerful nations in the world. We were the great inventors. We invented all your modern conveniences. The Catholics didn't do it. The blacks didn't do it of Africa. The Asians didn't do it of Asia. The Hispanics didn't do it of Central and South America. We did it. It's unique to us. And so therefore we are the ones who got the Bible in the hands of the common man, as William Tyndale wanted, so that the plowboy would know more of God than the priest. So with the Bible in the hands of the common man, and then being taken to the ends of the earth by the British fleets and so on, and the American fleets, and the Dutch fleets, and the Germans, we have the birth of what's called Western civilization. Western civilization started in 1648. Any secular historian will tell you that. 68. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of working here in the background, trying to get all my equipment to work properly. But no, yeah, carry on. No.
Okay. So in 1648, we have the end of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War began in 1618, and the one who started it was Ferdinand II, the hateful, bigoted Roman Catholic trained by Jesuits who became the head of the Habsburg Empire. And are we good?
Yeah, we're still carrying on.
I'm getting a little reverb here.
It's okay. I mean, you'll need to take that off. That's not that particular audio device is not working well. But yeah, no, carry on. I'm definitely interested in getting to this where in the direction where you're going, where you're moving towards the Congress of Vienna and the Holy Alliance. So yeah, no, go ahead.
Remember, about 1/3 of the German people were killed in that horrible 30 Years' War. The target was all the German Lutherans. And the target was to destroy Prussia, which was the most advanced nation on the continent because it was white and Protestant and read the Luther Bible. And wherever the Luther Bible went, they always prospered. The Lutheran Church prospered. They once preached the gospel. So the Jesuits sought to destroy the Lutheran Church in Germany and surrounding countries, Scandinavia, Sweden, you name it. And but they did not succeed. And so with the rise of 1648, you have two key treaties. The first treaty is the Treaty of Westphalia, which, by the way, the Nazis, in particular Roman Catholic Goebbels, wanted to undo the border settlements of that Treaty of Westphalia. So the Treaty of Westphalia had to do with Germany, and the Treaty of Munster had to do with the Dutch, because they had just finished an 80-year civil war fighting the savage Spanish. And you can read all about their savagery, their cruelty, in a 3-volume set titled The Dutch Republic by John Lothrop Motley.
These particular wars are fundamentally religious wars. Absolutely. Between the right of people to practice and observe, because the Bible is coming out now almost as a new discovery for civilization, because the whole Dark Ages was a response to basically not having any kind of biblical scriptural insight. And when the people are starting to get the Bible, it's starting to have these reverberations and consequences all throughout society. And then, of course, the papacy is trying to retain its sole, proclaimed religious right to rule over the people's consciousness and over their minds regarding religious matters. And so that's what led to war, basically.
As well as their government. Because you just talked about the spiritual power of the Pope. It's symbolized by the golden key on the Pope's flag, his yellow and white flag. That's the spiritual power that every human creature is to be subject to the Pope of Rome. That's the Bull Unum Sanctum of 1302. The other key is the silver key. And the silver key is the Pope's right to rule the governments of all nations, That's the doctrine of the temporal power. It was given to him by a bloody murderer named Pepin the Great, who was the father of Charlemagne. So what we have here in 1648, that's my clock. In 1648, we have the breaking of the Pope's political power over the Netherlands. And so the Dutch, Protestant Dutch, the Reformed Dutch, once they now had a free country where they did not have to do what the Pope told them to do, nor the Holy Roman Emperor, because the Holy Roman Emperor was the dictator of the Pope over all the nations of Europe for 1,000 years during the Dark Ages. It really begins from 606, when the Pope is given his spiritual power by Boniface. Boniface is given the spiritual power by Phocas, a bloody murderer in Constantinople. And then it lasts till 1648. So it's a little over 1,000 years. You have the Dark Ages of papal rule over Europe. And the classic work on this to read is Dowling's great work, The History of Romanism, written in 1845, John Dowling. And so 1648 means that now we have freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. It starts to spread. We have the Bible in the hands of the common man. It's starting to be printed. And remember, the Bible is the most printed book in world history, particularly the King James Bible. And so it's being spread to the ends of the earth through the merchant devices of the Dutch, the four great shipping nations were the Dutch, the English, the Spanish, and the Portuguese. Two Catholic, two Protestant. And so they took the Bible wherever they went. And that spread the gospel, and the Lord was saving his elect according to this plan. So the Jesuits were started in 1534, and they were formally brought into the Roman papacy in 1540 by Pope Paul III, and made the Jesuits part of it, because the purpose of the Jesuits was twofold. It was to take Jerusalem from the Muslims, and it was to destroy the Reformation and bring all nations back to the spiritual and the temporal power of the Pope. That's their twofold purpose.
So just to kind of point out that first point that you make that is talked about less is that they had this kind of mission, and centered in their mission statement was this desire to go and liberate the Holy Land or the area of Judea and Jerusalem from the Saracens and the Muslims. And according to history, Ignatius Loyola was in his lifetime traveling to that area and had a terrible time, and of course tried to make a pilgrimage. So this idea of opening up these avenues and these lanes of passage so that these individuals could make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, was central in their founding doctrines. But also it's an extension too from the past of the original founding ethos of the Templar Knights, was to do exactly that, which is to maintain and protect pilgrims coming into the Holy Land. So
absolutely.
So that was kind of a return to that. The Jesuits are founded in a return to the past, in a conservative way of restoring where the Knights Templar had kind of lost.
They kind of getting rid of the word conservative. It's really not that. It's just the restoration of the Knights Templars under another name. The Jesuit orders are the Knights Templars revived, except 1,000 times more deadly, because they have that much more power than the Templars have. So remember, Loyola was a Spanish Aragon Templar, and he was no Jew. So
he was a Basque.
He was a Basque.
So it's very specific, yeah.
And these ridiculous patriots are trying to tell everybody that Loyola was a Jew. There was no Jew. There were Jews in the order until they were all kicked out in 1593 with a particular
blood laws.
That's right, in their constitution. They kicked all the Jews out. What Jews were there? They kicked them out in 1593 because the Jesuits wage war against the Jews whenever they can.
Right.
And they will use Jews to further their purposes, like Henry Kissinger and others. But they are waging war against the Jews. They're the ones behind the entire Third Reich. Whole SS was patterned after the Jesuit order. Edmund Paris said that Heinrich Himmler's uncle was a Jesuit priest. Okay, so Himmler was advised by Jesuits. His whole purpose was not only the extirpation of the Jews out of Europe for the purpose of driving them back to Israel to start the revived Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, which happened in 1948. But his purpose was also to destroy the Reformation, and that's why they killed so many German Lutherans. Right. That's why they killed so many Dutch Reformed, English Anglicans. We never hear about the killing of the Protestants during World War I, World War II, which I call in my book the Second 30 Years' War.
I mean, that particular doctrinal violence that we're seeing there is coming out of like an ultramontane, old order line of thinking that goes back to, like we were saying, the Congress of Vienna and the Holy Alliance. So I look at that. I look at Himmler and Hitler as like an extension of that, of those kind of anathemas and those treaties and those alliances from the Secret Treaty of Verona in 1822 on. They had like an unspoken, kind of unwritten. They swore a perpetual oath to go ahead and destroy national government, especially America, and popular government everywhere in the world.
That's right. America was the greatest government ever founded in world history. You'll never find a group of men ever putting together a government as great as these men. And there were only 9 Freemasons who signed the Declaration of Independence. So don't let anybody tell you it's Masonic doctrine. The man who pushed it primarily was the great John Witherspoon, the president of Princeton College. So Princeton is the one, Witherspoon is the one who stood up and called for the signing of it in 1776. So it is a Protestant Calvinistic doctrine.
Yeah, I don't look at the lodges at that period of time in the 1770s. I don't look at the lodges in America as particularly illuminized or connected to the grand lodges or the great architecture of Illuminati control structure that really characterized the dangerous Freemason higher degrees of Freemason that would come Freemasonry that would come later on. But these earlier lodges were probably just simple guild halls, probably not what people imagine to be the New World, the halls of New World Order power. So it wasn't.
Absolutely.
Right.
George Washington said, American Freemasonry was not penetrated by the Illuminati.
Right.
His letters. So Finney puts it in his great work on Freemasonry, where Charles Finney was probably the greatest evangelist in America during the last half of the 19th century. He had been a Freemason, he was saved, and he writes his great book on Freemasonry. And he quotes George Washington, who said, the lodges in this country have not been penetrated by the Illuminati. And furthermore, without the low-level Blue Lodge Freemasonry, the American Revolution would not have succeeded. So that's why the Jesuits destroyed it, called for its destruction, and then they brought in as many as they could. Pardon me, the cat's in the heat.
It's all right. Go ahead.
It's my son's cat. Anyway, that's what George Washington said. And of course, you have many of the leading generals. They were low-level Freemasons, but they were nationalists. They were patriots. They were not sellouts. Okay? Right. George Washington was a third-degree Freemason, but he said, according to Finney, that he went into a Masonic lodge but once or twice in the last 30 years of his life.
Right. That sounds about right.
That. And furthermore, according to William P. Grady in his great work, How the Devil Turned America Against God, he shows you in there that George Washington was baptized in the Hudson River in 1783 by his favorite preacher, the great Baptist Calvinist John Gano, major in Calvin, I think he was a major, and he baptized him, and George Washington gave his battle sword to John Gano. And that's on display at Jewell College in Missouri. So, George Washington was no leading Freemason. He was just a low-level Freemason that didn't go into the lodge once or twice in the last 30 years because God was using him to set up an historically white Protestant and Baptist nation founded on the Reformation Bible, which is the King James AV 1611 in its present edition of 1769 before the American Revolution Bible. That was the Bible of the country. That was the book of the country. That's why Andrew Jackson said, sir, that book is the bedrock upon which this republic rests. So the Jesuits know this. So their purpose in destroying the Protestant Reformation through wars, subversion, assassination, one of their key purposes was to get the King James Bible out of the hands of the Protestant and the Baptist churches, which they have successfully done by 1960.
Right.
So the vast majority of churches are apostate. They have departed from the Reformation Bible, the Word of God, and they're all incorporated for the most part, or they're 501c3s. Very few are 508c1a like mine is. So as a result, the Jesuits have conquered the very enemies that defeated them in the past. As goes the church, so goes the government. As goes the morality of the people, so goes the increase of the national judgment, because God always judges nations based upon its morality. That's why Catholic nations are all poor. You don't find any wealthy Catholic nations unless they got it given to them by a Protestant nation. So,
I mean, the idea of Protestant nations or separate nations, or nations who will have a religious distinction that's their own and not determined by the Vatican Christendom universal religious system that kind of preceded this idea of like separate nations. And we have the success of a democratic republic, a popular constitutional democracy in America, so that the people, who are going to ultimately be a Bible believing people, are going to be founding this greatest nation in history, in world history. And now you can see today that we're kind of taking this terrible turn. And I wonder over the course of time, because we were talking about the Civil War ultimately, when we approach this point where the Congress of Vienna in 1815 is going to kind of the starting point. And then I like to point out that the Secret Treaty of Verona in 1822 is the same point in history when the British decide to end slavery. And if America, it's very strange to me because, in 1822 they officially do it. And it's interesting to me because America's founding sin, original sin, is kind of embracing slavery in its borders.
There's no slavery is not a sin. You show me anywhere in the New Testament or the Old Testament where the institution of slavery is a sin. It's not.
Well, I think there were early churches who probably in America who had issues with it as far as.
Yes, let me finish. They were against the savage Atlantic slave trade. Why, of course, because the Jesuits ran that, and they ran it through their British lords.
Well, I think that bringing it here into America ultimately is going to be this kind of demographic weapon.
Yes.
So I mean, over the course of time, the inability to really, even the disaster of the Civil War and framing it with this whole idea of slavery, while the British and the French are kind of going through this secularization, this liberalization period where they've already gone through the process of freeing their slaves, let's say, and in America it just leaves America in this terrible position historically. And I think that they used the issue of slavery as a disaster.
We need to go back. First of all, in the 1820s, 18 teens, there's an organization founded called the American Colonization Society. And you can read about it in Blake's great work, The History of Slavery and the Slave Trade, written in 1860. It's the classic work, written by a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, honest white man. We learn there that Francis Scott Key, the writer of our national anthem, was one of the founders of the Colonization Society and was one of the heads of it. And that was about repatriating or sending back American freed blacks to Liberia that was purchased by white Protestants from the tribal chiefs in Africa to give the American blacks a home in Africa. And they were gradually being repatriated. And the chapter in History of Slavery and the Slave Trade by Blake, there's a chapter called Liberia. You got to read it. You ought to read it. Just those 15 pages for a broadcast. Because it's an appeal by the black leaders, namely Joseph Roberts of Liberia, for the American freed blacks to come to Liberia. Because you're never going to have any freedom in America. But he says
it is awful for these people who had been carried away and brought to a place where they didn't have any kind of resources or skills to be able to withstand the environment and the elements. And so for them to be repatriated back to the lands where they were brought and carried away from in slavery would be the natural and orderly and just thing to do. And a
Yes.
to do, it's like a humanitarian crisis, and you want to get people back where they belong, and And so
That's right.
that goes to my point, Eric, is that initially, if America hadn't had resisted slavery with
But wait a second, let me interrupt.
Okay, go ahead.
We stopped the slave trade.
Right,
And Jefferson, when he writes, he has a hand in writing the Declaration of Independence because there's 5 men who wrote that, not just Jefferson.
And America's up against the slave trade ultimately.
That's right, because we were against it, and that filthy King of England negated our desires to end the slave trade in the colonies. Remember, the first colony to end the slave trade was Virginia.
Right.
First, under Patrick Henry. So no, we wanted to end it. And Jefferson wrote of it correctly. He called this horrible slave trade that's a disgrace by the King of England. And he also tells you the reason why they brought the blacks over here was to use them as a weapon to kill us. Jefferson talks about that, and because he put that in there. The Georgia people, the Senate there, refused to allow that section to be put in the Declaration of Independence. But that's a section that Jefferson wanted in there, and they would not allow it in there.
They would have really addressed this issue early on, and now it's kind of being festering like a boil in American politics, and
all because of erroneous, lying history.
Revisionist history.
Revisionist, which is lying history. It's not true history. It's lies.
You got to hear these big corporations. Yeah, these big corporations. They're coming out with statements to their employees that like Boeing, for instance, where only people who have a light complexion and have less melanin in their skin, right, who don't have dark skin, people who are European who might be called white, only they can be characterized as racist, and anyone else who might have a complexion or brown skin, they can't be characterized as racist in any kind of way. So you can see how the politics is approaching this ultimate kind of crisis.
Full-fledged attack against the white men, particularly the Protestant Baptists of this country. I remember when that savage, hateful racist Dick Gregory said black people cannot be racist. I remember when he said that. What a liar. Because the vast majority of them are. The vast majority of blacks in this country hate white people. I'm 70 years of age. I've watched it for 60 years. The minority civil blacks are Christian blacks, and they don't hate white people, but the vast majority do. So as a result of that, they're used as a weapon against us so that we will not be able to rise against the political tyranny that we have in Washington since March 9th, 1933, with the implementation of military emergency war powers military government. And so it's a ceaseless, constant attack. I've been kicked out of 6 banks so far. And I noticed that in every one of these banks, they're all pro-black, anti-white. All the advertisements, black man with a white woman or blacks, and you have very few advertisements for white people.
So you're being deplatformed. So when you go into the bank, everything's fine, but over the course of time, somewhere along the way, someone finds out that you have different views, and then all of a sudden you have problems, and you figure that's what it is.
Right. Okay. And they're going to close it up because of fraud. I just had it as my 6th bank about 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to have to go to my congressman and see what he can do for me, because I haven't committed any fraud in any of my banks that I've ever been in.
Now, is this personal banks, or can you have like a business bank account that's more of a generalized one that's not just only in your name, and then maybe have better success like that, or I don't know.
No, they closed all of them out.
Okay.
Closed Reformation Bible Trust.
Gotcha.
Both my LLCs, closed them all out. Because I'm the evil, wicked Eric Jon Phelps, who has the courage enough to tell the truth about what the Jesuits have done in using the black man against us in this country for the destruction of our country. And when that happens, then we'll have a successful Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. And you want to see some real hateful racists? The Chinese hate the American black man. The Russians hate the black man, and the Muslims hate.
It's interesting how many parallels there are and how much hypocrisy, because in these other places you mentioned, people are allowed to be themselves, and they're allowed to look after their own particular nationality or racial heritage, what have you. If you're Chinese, you're expected to be really Chinese, and that's wonderful. But here in America or in Russia, you're expected to be Russian. But here in America, obviously, it's you're becoming.
So my point being is that yes, No, white people that have historic Protestant and Baptist history are not allowed to be white. They're not allowed to have that history. They're not allowed to repeat it. And if you do, you're hateful and racist, and we're not going to hire you. And that's why the only solution is true repentance in faith, believing the gospel that Christ died for your sins, was buried and rose again, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. Now being right with God, be the nationalists that we're supposed to be by advocating a declaration of independence in our county or our state. That's the only solution, because the Jesuits want to drive all of us white men together into the new right, as they did in Germany. And this is what I'm deadly against, because if that happens, then we're in for some serious trouble.
Yeah, it is amazing how to see how this new kind of federal deep state monolithic, like they're using the FBI to come like some kind of neo Gestapo to ultimately. The reporting is out that the bomb that they found on January 6th was apparently like a test bomb that the FBI uses in training, and it's coming out that obviously that somebody placed the test dummy bomb out in front of the Democrat offices in order to create this idea that there's the illusion of white homegrown terrorism, and they did it themselves, and so all that is coming out, and it's of course too late because they already set into stone kind of their plan here, and you can see that we're moving towards roundups, and it doesn't make me feel better that Trump will come in here and start the roundups where he has to now remove 50 million people from our populace who aren't supposed to be here. That seems like a good starting point for a lot of what you're talking about here to begin.
Oh, of course, but remember, everything Biden does builds Trump.
Right.
Everything. That's why Biden was brought up by the Jesuits. Remember, Leo J. O'Donovan is the Jesuit who prayed at his inauguration. Right. O'Donovan was the president of Georgetown, who was also on Disney's 17-member board. O'Donovan was a powerful Jesuit. And so Biden is playing the left side and the radical side for the Jesuit order to create the right. And that is exactly what was done in Germany. Create the left. That's why they put Bavaria under communism, with openly Jews in communism for 19 months, which would drive the Bavarian Catholics into the arms of Hitler, because there were many Bavarian Roman Catholics that did not want Hitler.
So it stands to reason, from your point of view, you're not looking at Trump as a really beneficial, natural, organic political development, but a staged kind of persona, you think?
It's all CIA, brother.
Right.
Trump is completely in the arms of the intelligence communities. The intelligence communities run the politics of every country. We don't have free elections. We don't have the choice of who we want to run for us. We don't have those choices. It's just like the Dark Ages, because, in fact, we are now really back in the Pope's Dark Ages, how they ran the Jesuit reductions for 150 years. They had elections and voting, but you can only elect the ones that the Jesuits put up for you to vote for. That's how they ran the reductions. They do the same thing here.
And you're speaking of the reductions in Uruguay and Paraguay. From your point of view, you feel that they really were able to experiment on people and how people respond and how people are organized, and to really develop these theories of socialism and communism at that time.
R.W. Thompson says the Jesuits are the masters of socialist communism, the creators of it, in his great work, Footprints of the Jesuits, written in 1894. And so they're the masters of communism. What's his name? The man who became the Jesuit general was the tutor of Marx when he was writing the manifesto in London. So the Jesuits are the masters of communism, but they want to make it look Jewish, so they can blame the Jews for it and kill them for it, as was the case in the Third Reich. We're going to blame the Jews for what the communists did to the Russian people, when the Jesuits were the ones who did it to the Russian people, because Lenin at least readmits the Jesuit order after they had been expelled from Russia for over 100 years, when Alexander I had expelled them in 1820. They were readmitted in 1922. And then the Jesuits took over. They annihilated over 5,000 priests and nuns. They took over certain churches, turned them into stables. The Jesuits decimated the Orthodox Church with the Bolshevik Revolution. They're the great beneficiaries. You read about this in a book called The Decline of the Russian Empire by Edmund Walsh.
Right.
He talks about it. Greatest event, he said, it's the greatest event that took place since the fall of the Roman Empire in 476.
Well, I was stunned. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Tucker Carlson Putin interview, but I was stunned when, I should have already known that, but there's only apparently 150 million people in Russia. And it just seems like such an incredibly low population rate. It just makes me think of the wars, and it makes me think of all the things they've gone through that would be strangling that development over time. So
Remember, the Jesuits trained Joseph Stalin. You can read it in a book called Three Who Made a Revolution. And Stalin tells what it's like to be trained by Jesuits. They're always spying and peering into your life. Stalin was the utter dictator for the Jesuit order in the killing of all those Russian people during World War II. The guy who advised Stalin, his name was Alexander Paskrevishev. Paskrevishev was really the man Friday, according to Svetlana, Stalin's daughter, when Stalin had to sign all the death lists. It's Paskrevishev that ran things, and he was totally controlled by the Jesuit order, just like Harry Hopkins ran things in the White House, totally controlled by the Jesuit order for the benefit of using FDR. So FDR had his Harry Hopkins, Stalin had his Alexander Paskrevishev, Churchill had his Anthony Eden. All these guys were the real rulers, subject to the Jesuit order.
I guess Woodrow Wilson had his Edward Mandell House.
No, Woodrow Wilson had his Tumulty.
Okay.
Joseph P. Tumulty. He was the guy that oversaw everything that Wilson did. He was the fourth degree knight of Columbus. He, for 10 years, oversaw everything that apostate Protestant Southern man Woodrow Wilson did. And you couldn't get near Wilson unless you went through Tumulty. And I have it in my book.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the Knights of Columbus. Now, there were another order, a papal knighthood order that was begun in, let's see here, let me make sure I get my bearings right, 1832, and it was in New Haven, Connecticut. It was the same 12-month period, I guess the following year, and the previous year before that, in 1832, it was the Order of Skull and Bones was created. So it reminds me. So do you figure they are just part and parcel, the two sides of the same coin?
Of course. That's why the Bush family has one son in Skull and Bones, and they have another son in the Knights of Columbus.
Right. Good point.
Jeff Knights of Columbus, W, is a Skull and Bones. It's the same family. And then remember, the brother of the father of George W. Herbert Walker Bush was a Knight of Malta, Prescott. So Prescott was a Knight of Malta. W was a Herbert Walker Bush was a Bonesman and a Knight of Malta. So you got the Knights of Malta, the Bonesmen, the Knights of Columbus, all combined in that Bush crime family.
They begun in 1832, so it's really just a forwarding and a quiet, occult extension of the powers of the Holy Alliance as they're getting positioned, and then right after that, the next big event is the Civil War. So
that's right, because they had to get the Protestants in to control them, and Yale was a Protestant university. It was one of the major Protestant universities that was founded to evangelize the Indians. So the Jesuits got control of that and then used the finest of those sons in their work to bring on the war between the states, because it wasn't really a civil war. The South did have the right to secede. And then on the ruins of that, due to the treason of Robert E. Lee and the Southern Confederate leader, and also the Roman Catholic General Meade and Rosecrans and others, due to those acts of treason on the battlefield, they made sure that the South lost, that it would be conquered, and on the ruins of that South, they would create a new nation. It would be a national government, and that was the proclaiming of the 14th Amendment as ratified on July 28, 1868. That was the whole purpose for the war, nothing more.
Well, regarding the ability to secede, I mean, ultimately, these particular states, as they're called, were really sovereign, independent nations. Yes. Am I missing something? So ultimately, they had the right to do what they wanted, and they had the right to be a part of the treaty alliance, the grant of power in Washington D.C. and that union, or they had the right to be away from it. Now, ultimately, in the end, it seems to me that the North didn't really win because they ultimately lost their sovereignty for their nations as well. They no longer had the ability to operate as nation states, but now they're just part of this. They're subsumed as like counties into this larger national whole.
That's right. Now, because they made federal citizenship that was for whites, they made it national for whites and blacks. In the foundation of creating what I call in my book the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment, Socialist Communist, Corporate Fascist American Empire. And that was the foundation of it. Later, 3 years later, they'll start the District of Columbia that will be the center city for it, like Rome. It will be called Rome of the Potomac. But the crowning event is March 9th, 1933, when the Jesuits used FDR to impose emergency war powers military government for the National Republic created in 1868. That is critical that we understand that.
I mean, as we're building up in this kind of technocracy that they're building in America with Woodrow Wilson, and as they're moving forward, they begin to build a system where people are tied by their birth certificates and their social security numbers and their particular personal details, and they're tied to as indentured servants to the development of the national debt that they're going to bring about with the Federal Reserve System. And they're going to tie everyone individually in America who's born with these documents and who's tied to this IRS debt. They're going to basically create us into debt engines, if I understand this correctly, as we move forward.
Well, that's correct. Remember, the seizure on March 9th, 1933, the commander-in-chief began to wage war on the American people. And so he seized every piece of property, every person, and every place and thing. He seized it all. The commander-in-chief has legal title to everything in this country. And the horrible thing is that everybody, all the people, have volunteered to this by being a volunteer surety for this all-caps entity, which is an enemy belligerent in the Trading with the Enemy Act.
Now, when you say surety, you mean personal collateral.
That's right.
Personal collateral.
The military government writes laws for all the all-caps entities. But the man, the woman that's tied to it, that's joined to it, called joinder, they are the ones that have to pay the fine and do the time. But they only do it when they are put under an emergency war powers military jurisdiction or due process of law. That started in 1938.
That's what puts down all the constitutional protections and habeas corpus and all that goes away when you go into that state.
Because out of this emergency war power military government, they can implement martial law. They'll not do away with the military government, but out of that, they'll impose martial law. So that's their game. That's what they want. They want martial law, this military government to morph into that. And all the courts were set with military colors. I was just in Spokane a couple of days ago, and I decided to go there to file some papers. And I went up to the 9th floor and sat in on a little hearing where they had this savage Mexican invader in there. And they're giving him a trial and coddling him. And it was a gun charge. He had a Walter PPK, and he was picked up for it. But he's here illegally. So they're going to give him a trial, but in the whole procedure, of course, it's a woman judge. America's international judgment because we're ruled by women now, for the most part. And so that's according to Isaiah, when a nation's international judgment is ruled by women and children.
Right.
So what we have is a military color in the courtroom. It's a regular American flag, but on 3 sides there's gold fringe, and it has also gold cord and tassels, or sometimes it doesn't have that. But there's a military color. So the question is, why is the court flying a military color in what is an Article 3 civilian district court? Because we're under military jurisdiction since April 25th, 1938, when the Supreme Court of Infamy handed down the Erie decision, which did away with general federal common law. There is still common law under military jurisdiction, and it's judge-made case by case. But the federal general common law that really was in place since 1841 with Swift versus Tyson, the Erie decision reversed it. And the question wasn't even before the court to show what a criminal action that New Deal FDR court pulled with its leading, the man who gave the opinion, his name was Louis Brandeis. So they had to hand it to a Jew to give the opinion. So later on, when the new right comes to power, we can blame the Jews for this military jurisdiction in all the courts.
Fascinating. Now, I have to ask you about Texas right now. Do you believe that there could be some godly, good leadership there that starts to take back its right to be its own political entity and not to, literally it has Washington, D.C. trying to hold its arms down while the border is raped with, in an unbelievable way. You can see it's the World Economic Forum. You can see it's happening all across Europe. Or I guess you can see it. Maybe you can't see it if you're one of the regular Fox News watchers, you really just can't see anything that's going on in the world. But if you pay attention, you can see that there's a mass movement and a political energy behind moving millions of people from one side of the world to the other. And so I think it's the same kind of issue that we had initially when we had to deal with the wounds of the sub-Saharan transatlantic slave trade in our borders here in America. But now we have the same kind of circumstance. I think a lot of the people who were brought here long ago by slavery are now probably pretty good Americans by and large, and now we're bringing in this new population of real savages.
Many of them are, but remember, 70% of the blacks are illegitimate. You can't build a country on bastardry. You got to be married, and then you have children, and getting the blessing of God on the institution of marriage.
Yeah, we had that kind of going for us. I know that MLK Jr. wasn't, he had a lot of different things in his background, but he represented by and large a positive role model for Black Americans. And I think that after they killed him, they kind of instituted this process of bringing in crack and into the inner cities and having red, blue, Crips and Bloods, black gangs and all that.
After they forced integration, King was a communist. He went to the Highlander School in Tennessee. He was a communist.
He was a boule. I think he was a boule, as you might have said.
Also, according to Steve Coakley, who hated white people, but nonetheless, he told some truth. And so, yes, he was boule. He also raped many white women. He also killed a black woman when she was objecting to his beating of these white women that he was raping. So King was a murderer and a serial adulterer, and that's never told because you got to build him up because he's used to justify forced integration. And the Jesuits are the ones behind forced integration, not for the benefit of the blacks, but for the destruction of the whites. I went to school in the 60s when they shoved integration down our throats. And we white people didn't want it, and the blacks didn't want it either. They were busing the blacks over from Parchester Village into Pinole. They didn't want to go there. They wanted to go to Richmond High or Harry L's. But oh no, it was an abuse to them, and it was an abuse to us. So forced race mixing, miscegenation for the purpose of mulattoizing the country. And when that happens, there is no white people that can successfully resist the Jesuit order's international white power structure run by the Pope.
Well, I mean, it's a culture of criminality that's being popularized through Hollywood and through rap music and so on. And you have to understand that I personally had to move my kids away from the city because, and out into the country where they could be around other kids like them in more of a rural country atmosphere, because in the city they were just getting beat up on the bus, or they're ultimately going to get attacked and shot, and they're being pressed into that thinking, into that music culture, into that criminal culture, and that thought process too.
We have to remember the majority of the blacks in this country hate white people. And if they didn't, they would teach their children, you have to be respectful to the white children on the bus. I can't tell you how many videos I have where these black savages are beating the white children up on the bus.
Right.
So it's ingrained in their culture. That's why we have.
I think that kind of out of control cultural violence has been set on our schools and in our cultures. And I think that ultimately the social media apparatus existed to keep us from really seeing it as Americans or understanding that it was happening. Even though all of it was there, I think you can see other individuals like Elon Musk have come in now with Twitter X, for instance, and have kind of stopped regulating what people are seeing, and you can kind of see what's really going on more and more, and before we were blinded to it, perhaps.
Well, Hollywood and the news media will never tell us the truth. I don't care if it's the right or the left, they're not going to do it.
What about this Super Bowl shooting just recently? It's the same thing right there. They will not discuss what really happened there, who it was, or what kind of criminal culture was behind it.
The Super Bowl is a black celebration. Has been for years. Remember, 70% of all the football players are black. And so, as we have a black culture, black entertainment, we have pro-black, anti-white propaganda in all the movies. If you ever notice, when you watch a movie, the bad guy is always a white guy. Always. And the good guy is usually another black or whatever, and that's their general theme over and over and over again. So as people watch this, they think, yeah, these white people are just terrible. Look at this. It's a brainwash of Jesuit Hollywood.
It's really bizarre, Eric, because we were noticing in some of the movies lately, which it's almost unwatchable, but a lot of these movies will have like a deranged killer white guy. Yeah. And then if you kind of scan along his belongings in some of the shot, he'll have like a King James Bible on his desk, or something completely bizarre. It's the strangest thing ever.
right. So
I don't know if you noticed that.
yeah, that's a general theme. Yeah, it's a good black man versus a terrible white man. Hundreds of movies are like that. So I don't watch them. I just try to watch the documentaries that I can find interesting or helpful. But no, they have what we have here now is the culmination. We have a whole nation of majority blacks who hate white people. They're angry. Now, what can we do to create our new right with that? I know what we'll do. We'll have all this black on white crime, and we'll make sure we don't arrest them. We'll make sure we don't punish them with the law, which is the purpose of government, so they can do it over and over and over again to drive the white people to desperation and ultimate rage, especially the Roman Catholics, into the new right. And when the new right comes to power, it's over for the black man in North America. And it will really be over for him when the Russians get here, and the Muslims get here, and the Chinese get here. So he's finished. Unless he repents.
Well, Eric, if you look carefully from some of the reporting going on the border, apparently there is a whole phalanx of crowding foreigner people coming from China who are apparently not very friendly at all, and they're here. They're pouring in. They're pouring in under the wire here.
It's fifth column.
Right.
Remember,
really
Franco won the Spanish Civil War by sending his fifth column into Barcelona or into Madrid before he took Madrid. They always have a fifth column. And so that's what they have here: fifth column Muslims, fifth column Chinese, fifth column.
I mean, we must be really deeply into it because we just recently had this discussion that's come out with. Get this: it has Brett Weinstein and it has Alex Jones discussing how there's tens and tens of thousands of undocumented Chinese pouring over the border, and you know what I mean. So it's they're talking. I mean, and Brett Weinstein saying, "Look, I think it's a full blown invasion," and this is just the opening salvo.
Of course it. And remember, the reason why Clinton, that Jesuit, gave Long Beach to the Red Chinese for leasing is to put all their weapons there. So when they finally arrive, they're already armed. They can go to where they have their weapon storage and start moving east as they start taking everything in their path.
Well, we're getting close to an hour, which usually are very generous in letting us talk for an hour. And I just had another question, a little diversion. It had to do with this quick news cycle through Maui recently with the Maui fires. And I found some research that showed that there was some CCP launched satellites in the air, and it looked like there were the possibility of direct energy weapons was used. And this is news that was totally doused and not discussed. And this comes just a couple of years after Trump starts the Space Force military branch. So what do you think? Do you think that was? I don't know if you heard much about the direct energy weapons that were used, maybe in Paradise, California, even previously to this, but also in Maui.
Oh, yes. I have no doubt there are direct energy weapons used, but it's ultimately under control of the emergency war powers military government in Washington. Because remember, the Chinese Communist government was put in power by the military government in Washington in 1949 when Francis Cardinal Spellman made sure that happened. That's why Chiang Kai-shek was blocked. He couldn't invade mainland China. And so then China would have victory with Mao. And hence, 1949 is when the Jesuits put Mao in power. And everything they do in China is overseen by the Jesuit order and abetted by Washington District of Catholics, District of Columbia. Same way in Russia. It's the same exact deal. So the heart and soul of the problem, the heart and soul of the New World Order is the Pope's District of Columbia. That's why they put the all-seeing eye on the $1 bill in 1935 with Wallace, was vice president, high little Freemason. So, the solution is each one of our counties needs to declare its independence from Washington, from District of Columbia, from the United States, quote unquote. And we cannot secede. That's not permitted. Texas versus White, 1869. No state has the right to secede, but every state has the right to declare its independence. And so the state can do it, or the county can do it. But that's the solution. And and God forbid that we should be brought into the new right, because this is going to be bloody and savage, and all the camps will be smoking to kill at least 150 million people in this country and guillotining them.
So you feel like it'll break down into along these lines. But just a few maybe provocative events could lead us to this position where the people are like basically clamoring for an answer because of what they're basically being surrounded on all sides with these actual military threats. It's amazing. It's a military invasion on a border.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. And it's just because it's brought about by the Military Order Society of Jesus. Remember, on the borders of Arizona, they got a big statue of the Pope welcoming all the Hispanic Roman Catholics into North America.
Right.
And you have the whole the movement, the Aslan movement. We're going to take back southern part of North America, Arizona, New Mexico, California. That's the Aslan movement. They're not coming here as immigrants. They're taking it, portraying the white people that fought the Mexican War as a bunch of tyrants. When remember,
as far as Texas became a republic and it had to resist Santa Anna and basically freed the Mexican people from that tyranny, if I remember right.
That's right. Well, Texas, became a republic in 1836 about. And but the people there didn't want them because ultimately were being persecuted by the Spanish government that was run by the Jesuits, driving them to declare their independence. And by the way, the Declaration of Independence for the state of Texas is a great declaration because they named the priests as the culprits behind the tyranny in Mexico. But that's what they want. They want to incite this war. This is going to go to civil war because you can only push white people so far. We have it in our genes. When we get to a certain place, it's over. We don't care. We are not going to put up with this, and it will be war. And the Jesuits want to bring us to that so that they can have leaders that will direct us right into the arms of treason and defeat and betrayal.
Right. That's crucial. It's crucial that we find a way to bring America back into a place of liberty and freedom, and I think it's a refounding of America's constitutional documents, and maybe in lowercase caps this time. And I think it's been wonderful to spend time with you. What have you been working on lately? Do you have any book projects going on, or what's been?
I do have a book project I'm working on. It's actually two of them. One's called March 9th, 1933, when the Jesuits took over the country with its temporary emergency war powers military government established then and ousted civilian government. And then I also am working on another book for the true causes of all cancers, and that's parasites and fungus. And so when we deal with parasites and fungus, we will not have cancer.
Clear it up.
So,
interesting.
Yeah, I have a pamphlet on that I'm going to put out. Real cheap to prevent it, real cheap to reverse it. I just had a doctor friend had a 4x4 inch tumor on his neck. And he went through this regime, including soaking in the bath and baking soda and sea salt, as well as taking it orally. And the thing died, turned necrotic, and his body consumed it, and it's gone. So there's no need to suffer under the Jesuit order's cancer inquisition, because they put the cancer inquisition, in the Tropic of Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer is where all the historic white Protestant nations are.
Fascinating. No, I think you told me about a particular book. It was Doctor. Now it's gonna just I'm gonna forget. Say it again. Ben
Simicini. He's Italian, and he wrote the book "Cancer is a Fungus." And then the great Helga Clark wrote a book "Cure for All Cancers," and she said the key to cause it is the parasites. And then the real book that ties everything together is called "Cancer: Cause, Cure, Cover" by Ron Gdansky. He's a Canadian. He studied it for 7 years, and he shows the whole course how it happens and how to reverse it.
And you were talking. I remember the name. That was Dr. Mendelsohn. I think you were talking about another.
Oh yes, Robert Mendelsohn.
He suffered for having released that information.
Yeah. They killed him at 63 in good health because he was completely against vaccinations, and he showed how terrible they were. And he was such a great debater that whenever there was someone that was to come to oppose him, the chair was always empty. And so Mendelsohn had the day.
Well, I appreciate you speaking with you again, pastor and teacher and author Eric Jon Phelps. Thank you again, and let's talk again very soon.
My pleasure, Sean. Lord bless, and Lord bless your listeners.
You too, brother. Lord bless you. Okay. Have a great one.